Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now. Welcome to another hot take with Dr. Nathan Goodyear. I want to talk about cancer stem cells today. Cancer stem cells, they're not fixed roots to be pulled. They're actually shapeshifters, reprogramming cancer cells to improve survival. We're at a pivot point in many things in medicine today. Change in many ways is good. I was raised in the military, my dad was Air Force, and change, I always thought that I was told that change was bad, but what I discovered is hang around a little bit and your environment will change, and as a result, you adapt to that new environment. And there's a lot of talk about cancer stem cells. I was actually recently scrolling through social media, and they were highlighting the conference upcoming. They were saying, and it was a more natural conference, they said, let's target cancer stem cells. Now, that concept and that context of the entire ad and what appeared to be the entire conference was on an old model of cancer stem cells, what's called tumor hierarchy, which is a rigid model of cancer stem cells. We'll talk about that in just a second. But where we are now is we've pivoted per the evidence. By the way, understand that the science is never settled. That by its nature is unscientific. With new discovery comes new ideas, new concept, and evolution of the science. We are now understanding that cancer stem cells actually exist in a model of plasticity. See, when you have this plasticity, this reprogrammability, this adaptability, cancer cells are able to adapt in many aspects of its environment, not only to survive, but to outmaneuver therapy. And in this ad, they were saying, let's target cancer stem cells. Well, if we target cancer stem cells in isolation, the plasticity of what is the reality of cancer stem cells will lead to the failure of that treatment. See, we're at that shift from the traditional view of the distinct cancer stem cell and the distinct cancer cell that's not with stem activity. These are two distinct subpopulations. We are now in a pivot to, it's the environmental cues and the therapeutic pressures that are forcing cells that are one and the same to pivot bidirectionally to one behavior or one expression type to another. Same cell, different proteins, different behaviors, but it's a phenotypic variability on a spectrum, what's called polarization. We'll talk about that more in just a second. The classical stem cell model is the fixed hierarchy model. This is where cancer stem cells are a distinct, rigid, and rare subpopulation of cancer cells. They are simply cancer cells with stem activity. They are the root. And so the thought here, the failed root process of this, is that if you cut off the root, basically the tree, here the tumor, crumbles. Makes sense, right? And that's where we've been for a long time. This really shift in this model began in about 2008. But we have to understand that cancer cells have both stem and non-stem activity. This distinct subpopulation of these two cell types is not real. It doesn't fit with what we understand in biology, what we understand in cancer, and now what the science actually supports. Where we are now is we're a pivot into a plasticity model, one that's more dynamic. We used to look at tumors as just a solid ball of cells, homogeneous, isolated from the rest of the body. Homogeneous meaning all of the cells in the tumor are one and the same. We now know that not to be true. There's different pockets of hypoxia, normoxia. There's different pockets of acid base. There's different redox areas. There's all kinds of immune cells. There's bacteria, many different variables that create great heterogeneity within the tumor alone. We now know that it's not just a tumor in isolation from the rest of the body, but actually is engaging with cells that are non-malignant. This is in the tumor microenvironment. many different cell types that are there, immune being front and center, one of those. And in fact, we now know that cancer is actually allowing healthy cells that it recruits in there to do its dirty work for it. One way, it recruits immune cells in there and turns the immune system on the immune system. It also creates senescent cells, which are cells which are metabolically not active, but they're still producing hormones and growth factors and inflammation. And so this further accelerates the cancer progression. But cancer actually will create senescent cells of healthy cells. And these senescent healthy cells will promote senescent advancement of other healthy cells. And so it propagates this cancer environment. It's very adaptability. We now even know that the immune environments around the different tumors. So let's say you have 4 tumors in the liver. The immune environments around those tumors are going to be different. They're not individual. They're not isolated. They're unique. They're unique. So to better fix a model of cancer stem cells, or to better explain and adapt the understanding of cancer stem cells to the process of resistance and metastasis, which they play a key role in our advancing understanding, we have to pivot from that tumor hierarchy rigid model to one that is adaptable, reprogrammable, and actually plastic, or what's called plasticity. And of course, the tumor microenvironment is front and center in really what I believe is a pivot in that began in 2008. But also we have to understand the therapeutic pressures of surgery, chemo, and radiation. See, cancer doesn't just go, whoa, never saw the surgery coming, never saw the chemotherapy coming, full low dose, never saw the radiation coming. It adapts to the pressure, whether that's the environment from the outside that initiates its causation, or whether it's the treatment that's coming at it to destroy it. It must adapt to survive. So if it's encountering chemotherapy, it can pivot from a cancer cell without stem activity to one that has stem activity, that changes its metabolic behavior, enables it to better escape that treatment and thus recur to promote treatment resistance down the line, cancer recurrence, but then also metastasis, which is why 90% of morbidity and mortality in cancer occurs is with metastasis. So this therapeutic pressure actually promotes the cancer to adapt, and it does it not through changing the genome, but actually in changing the genetic expression, what's called epigenetic reprogramming. And this epigenetic reprogramming is what allows these cancer cells, whether stem or non-stem activity, to move from one side bidirectionally to the other side of that spectrum. It's a plasticity model. It fits with our understanding in cancer as a whole. It fits with that multi-omics, genomics, epigenomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, immunomodulomics, hormonomics, etc., where we understand the complexity of cancer and the ability of cancer to adapt and behave in all these different environments that exist alone, exist in the primary tumor, exist in the metastatic sites, but also exist as a result of the treatment and the pressure provided. Now, if I was just talking about a plasticity model of cancer stem cells, and it was not evident anywhere else in the body, I would say take great caution with that. But this is actually just in a long line of other cells which show the same phenotypic polarization spectrum, meaning cells adapt their behavior, adapt their function, adapt their expression based on the environment. Macrophage plasticity. These are M1, M2 macrophages that adapt in relationship to iron, ferritin, hypoxia, and M2s are pro-tumor. M1 are anti-tumor. So one of the things that will happen is cancer will recruit these macrophages, which are immune cells, to the tumor microenvironment. The hypoxia that encounters these M1 get converted to M2, and it supports the tumor at the detriment of the rest of the body. Same thing occurs with neutrophils, type 1, type 2, N2 being pro-tumor, N1 being anti-tumor. T cell or T lymphocyte cell plasticity, adapting to its environment. Epithelial to mesenchymal transition. This is, I talk a lot about this as it relates to cancer metastasis. See, we like to think in things in ways we can understand. Rigidity, sequential. And epithelial to mesenchymal transition is an easy way to try to understand and explain off metastasis. See, epithelial cells tend to be more fixed and non-mobile. Mesenchymal cells are more mobile and thus spread. So epithelial to mesenchymal transition is a mechanism, a theory to explain how cancer cells move from an immobile state to a mobile state. But flip that around, that epithelial to mesenchymal transition, which again is a polarization spectrum similar to cancer stem cells here, the macrophages and neutrophils, but then that flips from mesenchymal back to epithelial to actually move to an immobile state. And we also see this in fibroblast plasticity also within the tumor microenvironment. The cancer stem cell plasticity model is born out of a rejection of the magic bullet theory. Now, the magic bullet theory was first described by Paul Ehrlich in the early 20th century. It was the treatment of one disease with one therapy, one chemical, chemotherapy. It had nothing to do with cancer. It was actually the treatment of syphilis with salvaricane. Though we know magic bullet theory can have some application in disease. I mean, goodness, look at Chernobyl. Look at Nagasaki, Hiroshima. But that's very rare. Most of disease, here looking at cancer, it's not the magic bullet theory, but it's a bunch of things occurring together. The body, the cells adapting to an inhospitable environment, both outside and inside. And we have to understand that we can't target cancer stem cells through a magic bullet theory because it doesn't prove to be effective. I mean, this has largely been disproven as science has advanced moving forward. No one cause to cancer, no one treatment to cancer. We can't target cancer stem cells alone. We can't say, well, we're going to hit a moving target with a single shot. Well, what if that moving target is moving from cancer stem cell activity to cancer cells without stem activity? But it's one and the same. It's adaptable, it's reprogrammable, it's modifiable. We must provide dynamic adaptation because that's exactly what cancer cells and cancer stem cells do. They switch phenotypic behavior, which is expression. See, when we adapt to environments, get a lot of sun, our skin darkens. When we don't get a lot of sun, our skin lightens. This is not a change of our genetic code, our genome, but it's a change of the expression, epigenetics. And it's this phenotypic switching that allows us to better adapt to our environment. It's exactly what cancer cells and cancer stem cells do. So we aren't just at a pivot point. The pivot point really began about 2008. We're at a new consensus of cancer stem cells. So when you hear about cancer stem cells, I want you to think adaptable, plasticity, programmable. Cancer works to survive, just like you work to survive. Whatever that environment is, cancer cells can adapt to it, reprogram to it, and become plastic that's malleable to that environment. So we've got to move away from this concept of rare, rigid, fixed tumor hierarchy, the root, and understand that where we are is in a adaptable, malleable, reprogrammable environment that gives cancer cells the ability to pivot bidirectionally between cancer stem cells and cancer cells without stem activity. And it fits throughout what we understand in cancer now. A lot of biology is being reproduced, and so we can't target the root. If we target the root in isolation, it's a failed therapy. We must target the plasticity from the changing environment to truly target both cancer cells without stem activity and cancer stem cells. Hope you've enjoyed this hot take by Dr. Nathan Goodyear. I encourage you to check out the show notes where we have the 2025 article that I mentioned and all the other cancer stem cell tumor hierarchy and plasticity studies that I mentioned. Also, check out the podcast where we go much deeper on this concept of cancer stem cell plasticity model, a new frontier. I'll see you on the next hot take.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribe Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribe.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.